Welcome back to the Done Deal Show. I'm joined by Ben Jacobs. Lots to delve into this morning after an explosive Monday night in the transfer window with Declan Rice. Mbappe essentially saying he wants to leave. Man United's takeover. Big news coming from the Middle East as well. Big headlines are small in the Caicedo and Chelsea are getting closer. But we're going to delve into all those rumors. We're going to get Ben Jacobs' opinion on all of them, what he knows surrounding the lot. But before we do that, Ben, how are you, my friend?
Very good. Transfer window is almost upon us, but it's felt for the last week like every day's been deadline day because the stories never stop.
They certainly do not. And as we said last night, I finished the show, made some food. I was sitting down to chill, watch a few episodes of The Walking Dead. And then suddenly, Rice news. Then there's the Mbappe news while I was live. Then I was finished. I was literally getting into bed and all the Man United stuff broke. It was an absolutely crazy, crazy night indeed. I want to start with Man United because I know it's obviously trending news this morning. Reports coming from the Middle East last night that, and I want to make sure I phrase this in the right way, but essentially stating that Sheikh Jassim's bid was going to be successful, that the deal was progressing, or they were the preferred bidder. Social media went into crazy meltdown. The share price, people buying shares ahead of the New York Stock Exchange opening, it grew by about 16% last night. But what is your understanding in relation to these reports that Sheikh Jassim has been successful in his attempt to buy Manchester United?
Well, when the stock market moves that dramatically, it's always significant to an extent, but it's ultimately just traders reacting to the markets. And this all came from Al Watan, a Qatari newspaper that ran a graphic on social media. And when you translate it, it said press reports. So they're aggregating. But because there's a link between the paper and Sheikh Jassim's father, who's known as HBJ, everything went into overdrive, and then suddenly it got picked up upon by wider media and other Qatari media, and suddenly everyone's waking up to this suggestion that Sheikh Jassim has won the race for Manchester United. And actually that is downplayed by those on the selling side and significantly those on the 9-2 Foundation as well. Now, it's really easy to just put a Qatari flag on social media or say somebody's won, but this is a highly significant moment for Manchester United. And anybody reporting on the potential takeover has to be categorical and 100% right. And it's not about pouring cold water. It's not about saying that Sheikh Jassim won't win, or the same for Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Ineos. It's simply about being accurate. And as of last night, neither group had been informed that they'd won the race for Manchester United. Both are still there. And the other thing I would add is we're not, to my knowledge, going to get an exclusive preferred bidder. What's actually happening is these deep, deep talks to get both groups ready to actually, in inverted commas, win and then go through a completion process. So it's much more deep and advanced. Whereas with a preferred bidder, it would usually be associated with exclusivity. And in that exclusivity, you would continue due diligence and potentially even final negotiation. We're beyond that. My understanding is that the Sheikh Jassim and the Ineos bid, plus any third options such as minority investors or financiers, have submitted what is known within takeover terms as executionable offers. So that means that they're bound by them. And this is why nobody's needed to date to go into exclusivity. So I understand that Manchester United fans are desperate for clarity. And I also understand that if somebody says that Jassim's won, it's cause to jump the gun and celebrate. But responsible journalism is about context. And I'll say this very openly and honestly. I don't care whether I'm the first person or the 1,000th person to report on the conclusion of the Manchester United sale process, because I've given you in-depth and consistent reporting throughout and a number of different exclusives. And we're at the point now where there's one thing that matters: who's won. And if you get it wrong, it's highly irresponsible. If you go too early, it's highly irresponsible, because this is a massive moment. It's a seminal moment for the entire football club. And again, at this point, both 9-2 Foundation sources and those on the selling side say two things. One, no group has been informed that they've won. And two, that nothing is necessarily groundbreaking or will be public in the next 48 hours or so. So I think that everyone needs to take a step back. I understand that the stock market can mean things. I understand that some people are clinging to Al Watan because of the links with HBJ. And of course, we're asking all the same questions as journalists. It's not like we're just pouring cold water over something because somebody's told us that it's not done yet. We're going to all sides, including in Qatar, including directly within the foundation, including on the selling side, including on the Ineos side, and anywhere else that we can get information. And for me, anyway, nobody at this point is fueling the accuracy of what we heard last night. So, of course, if somebody wants to say that Qatar will win, you've effectively got a 33% chance or a 50% chance of being right. And congratulations to you if you've jumped the gun and you prove to be accurate. You can retweet it over and over again and say that you were one of the first. But when I am sure of the winner for the Manchester United sale process,
and that is,
I will say so.
And that is more fair, to be honest with you, Ben. If you come out here now and say to United fans, look, it looks great, you're getting him, and then it doesn't happen, then you really will be public enemy number one with Man United fans, rather than this has been done, this is a scenario, there's this chance. Look, as a Man United fan, I'm not a journalist, never claimed to be. You know, I sort of look at this, no smoke without fire. I'm hoping they feel confident and they can get it done. What was really encouraging was something I read this morning, that it says that several parties have been offered to buy minority stakes in the business, although the process has changed to a degree. The longer this goes on, experts expect the Glazers to be taking the option of minority investment. It seems as much more unlikely, which I think is a really good bit of news for Manchester United fans. But let's just wait and see how the land lies.
Can I just add two more things as well, really briefly? One is that Al Watan were aggregating, and not necessarily from the most credible of sources. And yes, you could argue that having seen the reports as a credible outlet, they will have done their own due diligence. But that's not what they wrote. They referred to it as press reports. So quite clearly, if it is true in their eyes, they would have a direct source to find out. And then they would be splashing that as an exclusive all over their back pages. They weren't. They were aggregating reports that set all of this up, and relatively dubious reports as well that actually initiated all of the smoke that we now see. So we have to be very careful, I think. And then I see in the chat people saying that the share spike shows that the money's been paid. That's simply not true. The transfer of funds would be pretty much the last thing in any transaction and would come after the Premier League owners and directors test has been passed. So this is another thing just to bear in mind, that even though things are deep and advanced, it's at the point where if the Glazers greenlight either group, they would get a signature, and that signature would have a very significant break clause if either party then pulled out at that point. And then from there is what can be referred to as box ticks, although Newcastle United fans that are listening would obviously say the Premier League owners and directors test was not a box tick for them. It added 18 months to their takeover process. But the feeling is if Sheikh Jassim wins, then his route to full acquisition is obviously slightly different to Sir Jim Ratcliffe's, because Jassim is taking the entire football club off the stock market, whereas Sir Jim Ratcliffe is only buying either all of the Glazers shares, that's one option, or around 50%, and then leaving Joel and Avram there. So they've got slightly different routes to full acquisition, but the transfer of funds comes last. So any suggestion that they've paid, that they own the club, is again jumping the gun. There is winning, and then from winning, there is completion. And completion can take 2 or 3 weeks, but it can also take 6 weeks. A lot just depends on all of the different legal and logistical box checks. And that includes the transfer of funds, which will come last. It includes the Premier League owners and directors test. But for Sheikh Jassim, he also has to delist the rest of the shares, the non-Glazer shares, and that may be routine, but again, it takes time.
Yeah, absolutely does, and I'm sure we'll be keeping abreast of it. United fans, don't get carried away. Be excited maybe, but don't get carried away just yet. Seems to be the message. Staying with Manchester United, what is the? Well, obviously, I want to ask you about Jadon Sancho's potential exit to Tottenham, but before that, what's the latest with Mason Mount? Because we're hearing the same thing now, that 80 million is this asking price that Chelsea are not budging from. Are you hearing anything different?
Well, I don't think that Chelsea's price is 80 million. I think it's more like 70 to 75 million, which might not seem like a big difference. But if you're starting around the 70 million pound mark and then you're negotiating, there's always a possibility that the suitor will get that number down slightly, or will be able to think of something a little bit more creative. I think that when Chelsea hold out for a total package of 70 to 75 million, that doesn't mean that they're demanding it in a guaranteed sense. So maybe some of the add-ons are less gettable, if you like, such as Manchester United winning the Premier League or the Champions League. And this, again, comes back to something I always say. I'm going to bore you to death with this throughout the window. Structure is as important as number. But in essence, Manchester United, as I understand it, would like to bring 2 in early in the window, regardless of the ownership situation. And if they're to bring in 2, we're discounting the Osimhens and the Kanes in terms of the actual budget here. If they're to bring in 2 others away from that traditional number 9, where a big outlay would be required on one player, then they want to keep that spend around the 100 million mark. So Mount at 70 to 75 million takes up 3/4 of the budget. Mount at 50 million might allow Manchester United to try for a Højlund, which could be a young option, as far as strengthening the front line, or alternatively somebody like Kim at the back, who has a release clause that's only active for the first 2 weeks of the transfer window. So Manchester United want Mount for under 60 million, and sources increasingly are saying closer, if they can, to 50 million. And if the number stays this high, Manchester United will walk away. So we've got 3 aspects here. One is Chelsea still want to keep Mount, but there is pessimism. There's a high probability he'll leave. 2 is if Chelsea move into selling mode because they realize that Mount is not going to sign with them and they don't want the contract to run down, are they going to come down on the number? And then 3 is from Manchester United's perspective, because of financial fair play and to a lesser extent the ownership uncertainty, but financial fair play is the big one. Are they going to bend at their end and get closer to Chelsea's valuation? Because if they stick to their guns and around 50 million, then it's going to be quite a tricky deal to negotiate. So this is really going to come down to club negotiation. And as far as I'm aware, at the time we're recording this, they haven't actually placed a formal offer yet. So there's a lot of sounding out, and there's a fair amount of Manchester United approaching the player side, and they believe that they've got buy-in, which is why Manchester United are favourites ahead of, say, Liverpool and Arsenal. Mount is leaning towards Manchester United, but there's a long way to go in terms of the actual club-to-club negotiations, because Manchester United are not going to be paying 70, 75 million for Mason Mount. They're looking for under 60 million. And they're not only doing that because they believe that that's where the value is, because Mount's contract is running down. They're doing that because collectively they want to try and bring in 2 early in the window. And if Mount eats up too much of that budget, they might miss out on another target.
Yeah, which makes perfect sense. And that's kind of echoed what a number of the reports we've seen have said. And I think Man United fans are really concerned about the price becoming, too high for an individual like him. In terms of Jadon Sancho, there's been a lot of speculation that he may be on his way out of Manchester United, PSG linked to him, but also Tottenham. And reportedly, the deal with Tottenham is one that's, there's real, genuine, bona fide interest in him and a potential exit. What's your understanding of that situation, Ben?
Well, Erik ten Hag still really likes the player. That's the first thing to say. So I certainly wouldn't say that Sancho is top of the list in terms of outgoings. There's other players that need resolving first. Harry Maguire, for example, is going to be one of them. And there's a lot of speculation about David De Gea as well, and whether the current number 1 at Manchester United stays or goes. Manchester United are looking for a number 1. They need a succession plan. So the Tottenham interest is real in the sense that they like the player. It's the same for PSG, and also Napoli have sent scouts to watch him as well. There's nothing advanced at this point. There's a lot of agent talk. There's a lot of speculation. So Tottenham would be keen on exploring that deal, but there's high wages and there's also going to be a high price if Manchester United are persuaded to sell. I would say people are speaking in the media about 45 or 50 million. I think it might even be as high as 60 million particularly, but 50 plus million is maybe an accurate starting point. But first of all, Manchester United need to decide whether he's surplus to requirements. And I think because of the age and the profile, Erik ten Hag still thinks that there's a role to play there. So we have to wait a little bit and see when the dust settles on this one. First of all, what Erik ten Hag wants to do with the player. That's the most important thing. It's the same with Maguire. He'll have a meeting to determine whether or not they're going to move forwards with Maguire. And I think Erik ten Hag will inform Maguire first and foremost that he's dropping down the pecking order. We've known that anyway from last season. And then Maguire will have to ultimately understand a role in the team, both on and off the field, or decide to leave. And Manchester United are clearly open to selling Maguire at the right price. A lot will just come down to Harry Maguire and whether he's prepared to continue this increasingly diminished role in the team, especially in relation not just to playing time, but also he'll want to maintain his place within the England setup as well. So he's quite a likely exit finally, even though every single window we've heard Maguire rumours and he's not actually gone anywhere. I think this is the summer where Maguire may say, okay, I need to get game time somewhere. So that one, I think, has credence to it. With Sancho, I think that Ten Hag is going to dictate the entire situation. And every club under the sun, including Tottenham, can be very interested in the player. But first and foremost, Erik ten Hag has to decide whether he is or isn't surplus to requirements.
Yeah. And for me, I look at it this way. I think it all depends upon our takeover. And I mean that from the point of view of what budgets are available and who can Manchester United sign to replace him. If there's a better alternative, then of course you may let Sancho go. But if you can't bring him better, it becomes an obsolete action to remove him, because you get rid of Sancho and you bring in somebody that's substandard in comparison. That's a bad move. So depending upon this takeover for United, the budget we have, and who else is available in the market, that's really going to that feels to me like it will dictate this potential exit. As bad as Sancho has been in the last 2 years, or inconsistent as he has been, as you've stated, the Maguires of this world, McTominays of this world, there's far more pressing exits away from this club than Jadon Sancho, I think. So yeah, it's going to be interesting, very, very interesting indeed, to see what happens in that space. There's also talk of Paris Saint-Germain looking at him, but we obviously know that Paris Saint-Germain have got a lot of issues, should I say, at the moment. Could you see them coming in for him, or would that only be if the likes of Neymar and Mbappe leave this summer?
I think there's a very realistic chance that Neymar leaves. If PSG can sell him, they will do so. They'll be delighted if they can get a fee for Neymar, so he can be considered a player on the market and very available for an exit from the Parc des Princes. I think with Sancho, he fits PSG's billing, which is buy young. And then the other thing to understand about PSG is trying to move away from star power and high wages. And this is maybe where they have to understand the player and his demands. So there's nothing concrete at this point. I think it's very normal for clubs to register an interest. It's very normal for clubs to scout players at this stage, especially if they think they might be available. And you don't just do that because you want to sign a player. You do that also because you want a yardstick as well. So you might notice that Manchester United have crept into the conversation around James Maddison, who's been traditionally linked with both Newcastle and also Tottenham Hotspur as well. And suddenly Manchester United are just creeping into the conversation, even though there's nothing massive there. And why is that? It's because Maddison's available for 35, 40 million, maximum 45 million, whereas Mason Mount is 70 to 75 million. So you can use an option that effectively is leverage or an alternative. And if Chelsea realise that Maddison is being sold for 40 million and they're asking for 75 million, suddenly it's a no-brainer. If you genuinely, as a potential suitor, think that they're relatively similar in terms of what you need, to go for the significantly cheaper one and maybe use that to help drive the price down. So this is where the games of the market take place. You spend as much time actually chasing a legitimate target as doing due diligence on your rivals and other targets, because you have to understand the value in the market and also the movement that's there. So PSG certainly are looking at these type of players. There's nothing more advanced than that. There's no contact with Manchester United. We know, for example, PSG historically have also looked at Rashford as well. The feeling is, under the Glazers or any new owners, that a new deal will be thrashed out there. Manchester United don't feel that Rashford will leave. Even PSG never felt it when Nasser Al-Khelaifi met with the Rashford entourage. But again, they still took that meeting because they wanted to know the lay of the land. And there's a lot of that type of thing. There's a lot of these forms of meetings that tend to take place now at this stage, because ultimately you're bracing yourself for the window opening and it's a long summer.
It is a very long summer, and as you say, it's a lot of fans often get frustrated about why we're linked to him, why we're linked to that person when we're buying him. For the reason you just pointed out, I enjoy that element of the process. There's no doubt. In terms of James Maddison, we've obviously seen Tottenham links. Newcastle in the last couple of days have been reported as the closest to getting the deal done, or the front runners in the race. How do you see it personally, Ben, based on what you've been told?
With Kylian Mbappe, I think we ought to just outline the context of what actually happened, because I think that there's some confusion around the timeline and the significance. So Kylian Mbappe, you may remember, held up a shirt saying 2025, which was technically the length of the contract, but it was a 2+1. And the final year, so 2024, 2025, is a extension that can only be triggered by the player. PSG are powerless. And if Mbappe is to trigger that 1-year extension, then he has to do that, or now had to do that because the situation is resolved, by the 31st of July. And if he didn't act on the 1st of August, the 1-year extension comes off the table. So Mbappe wrote a letter to PSG confirming that he wouldn't trigger the 1-year extension. And PSG were very surprised by that, first of all, because they learnt about the letter in the media before receiving it. And second of all, because there's no legal need for Mbappe to inform this early that he's not triggering the extension. In fact, he doesn't have to do anything. He just has to wait until the 1st of August. But he specifically told PSG that he's not triggering the 1-year extension, which means that as things stand, he'll leave the club in 2024, and that would be on a free transfer. And PSG don't want to let him leave on a free. So suddenly he becomes open in the market this summer. But it's much more complicated than that, because PSG have been in talks about a new contract with Mbappe. So just because he's not triggered the 1-year extension doesn't technically mean that this isn't a game and he won't end up signing a new deal at the Parc des Princes. But the fact that PSG are fuming about how they learnt about the news certainly suggests that there's tension at the moment between the Mbappe camp and also PSG. So we now have to wait and see. And the other thing is that, let's say Mbappe just wants to join Real Madrid, and Real Madrid say, we weren't planning for you this summer. We've just spent 103 million euros on Jude Bellingham. We'd rather wait a year. Then technically, there's nothing that PSG can do. PSG can say that Mbappe is available on the market. They can listen to offers. They can try and sell Mbappe if they know that he's going to be leaving in 2024. And that might lead to a cut price deal for Real Madrid or another suitor. But by the same token, if you're smart and you're Real Madrid and you don't need Mbappe urgently and you've just got Bellingham and you want to wait, then if Mbappe and Real Madrid say, we'll see you in a year on a free transfer, there's very, very little that PSG can do. So there's a lot of moving parts here. PSG genuinely don't know if it's a tactic or not from Mbappe. And we've seen a lot of games. You may remember in January, we were told that he wanted to leave immediately, and that was not true. And then he said he's happy at PSG. So I would take everything with a pinch of salt, but I think that it's very important to note that PSG are surprised by the timing of the letter, as I reported last night. And then in terms of other clubs that could come in for Mbappe, we know about Real Madrid, and that's widely seen to be his preferred destination. I think depending on the price, they may struggle to do business this summer, especially if there was a bidding war that emerged. I think there's historical Premier League interest. We know that Liverpool have looked in the past, and even Manchester United, but Manchester United don't have the finances and the budget at this point to pull off that kind of deal, because regardless of what the fee is, you've also got to cover the wages as well. And then my understanding is that Chelsea are not interested. I know that we've seen some reports out there that they are likely to register an interest, that they may explore the deal. The only thing I can tell you about Chelsea is historically, they have indeed explored Mbappe, as you would expect for a top club. But at this stage, Chelsea are not in the race for Mbappe should he become seriously available this summer, which is the direction of travel at the moment, because unless PSG agree a new deal, they will be absolutely desperate not to lose Mbappe on a free.
I get that, and I know that you report what you're being told, and I 100% understand that. As a football fan, if I was a Chelsea fan, Man United, I'm a Man United fan, but if I was supporting Chelsea, Arsenal, any team with rich owners, if Mbappe is available and you don't bid or try and get him, I almost think that's gross misnegligence by default, because he's 24, turning 25 this season. If he leaves Paris Saint-Germain, this is the last chance your club ever has of signing him. And I know he's a lot of money. I know the wages are high, but he also will bring in so much revenue as a commercial entity as well. Surely there's a way of circumventing that. With Man United, look, if we get Qatari owners and we ain't all in for this guy, I'll be so disappointed, genuinely disappointed, because if we stay as we are now with our ownership, I totally get we don't have the money in the bank to afford him right now. We get new owners who can pump in cash. You know, there's always ways of finding mechanisms. Just how the way they signed Neymar. Neymar actually bought his own contract out because Qatar sponsored him privately to be able to do it. You know, in all intents and purposes, I would expect the big teams to go in for him. Do you think it could change if PSG announced that he's not signing a new deal and definitely going to leave, or do you feel like clubs are maybe playing it a bit coy right now because they don't want to be seen as rejected or whatever else? Do you actually think they'll change their minds if he officially becomes available on the market?
Well, he's officially available on the market anyway, because he's not signed anything. So you don't wait for PSG to decide. You don't say, hello, Nasser Al-Khelaifi, I'm going to let you do all your negotiations. I respect the fact you want to keep the player. I'm going to wait and wait and wait. You say, hang on a minute, nothing's signed. I'm going to see if I can alter the situation. So you're as bullish as possible if you want Kylian Mbappe. And I think Mbappe sent a message of try and get me if you can, whether that's now for a fee or whether that's in 2024. But sometimes I think fans only look at the target and they hear the word available and their eyes light up, when you also have to understand whether you stand a chance. So if you ask any top club, did you want Messi? Would he have benefited your team? Did you want Ronaldo when he was at his peak? And any other player, Erling Haaland, for example, did you want them? Well, of course, any top club challenging in the Champions League would ideally like many of these top players because they're versatile enough, they're talented enough, they're commercially viable enough to benefit pretty much any club in the world. But can you get them? So if you're Manchester United, regardless of financial fair play, if you go to the Mbappe camp and all you hear is, he's going to join Real Madrid, he wants to join Real Madrid, or even if you don't get such an explicit answer, if you feel like in entering that race, it's going to drag on and drag on and drag on, then it may not be worth it. Because remember, even if you can afford Mbappe, it's still going to be at the expense of something else. So imagine if it's a game with PSG and they continue to try and get him to sign a new deal. It's a game with Real Madrid. Do they want him now at what they perceive to be a bargain number? Or are they just going to wait and wait and wait and then hope that they get him on a free transfer? And if all of this is at play, is the Mbappe situation going to be resolved today, tomorrow, next week, next month? I would say probably not. So if you want him, you have to play the long game. You have to join a saga that you may win, but if you lose, then you've effectively withheld that budget, withheld that wage, maybe walked away from another target because you're led to believe it might come off. And then suddenly, if you're Manchester United, it's a Frankie de Jong situation and it left them scrambling at the end of the window. And luckily, they had extra budget and they made some fantastic signings. So fair play to the recruitment team. But still, there was frustration all window. And I think that this is a consideration as well. It's not just about should a club show ambition, it's should a club enter a race? And they only really tend to enter races clubs if they have a realistic chance of winning. They don't just want to waste their time out of PR and out of misguided ambition and then lose. And I think Liverpool were the same with Jude Bellingham. I know that in the end, Liverpool's logic is very much large amount of budget if you include fee, bonuses, wages, agent fees, and they didn't want a drawn out saga. And yet Bellingham has gone to Real Madrid for 103 million euros, which is not as high as the fee could have been. And it's been done effectively before the transfer window has opened. So it also hasn't been a drawn out saga. In fairness to Liverpool, I would say that if they'd have still been in the race, if Manchester City had entered the race, it might have become a drawn out saga and it might have become a higher price. But the point in all of this is not only about money and ambition and is the player a fit. It comes down to, does a recruitment team genuinely feel that they can win a race? And if you don't think you can win the race, there's no point in just posturing and getting on a high horse and being like, we tried, we pushed, we wanted him, we're ambitious. Walk away.
And I totally get that side of things. I suppose it's just understanding that as a fan, because if you don't think you've got a chance of doing it, he'll say no, then you don't get in. But almost the way I've seen it, the way it can be written sometimes is they've got no interest in going in for that player. And I suppose for me as a fan, I just want specificity around what we're not interested in. Are we not interested in the player, or do we feel we can't land him, therefore we're walking away? Just because there are fans online who get annoyed by it. Oh, why would we not want him? He's better than what we've got. As you've just said, well, if the club doesn't believe they can sign him, it doesn't matter whether you want him or not. It becomes a pointless exercise. So that makes perfect sense to me. Sort of staying with Chelsea a little bit here. A lot of talk about Moises Caicedo. About a week ago, there was talk about £100 million bids. We know that's now been debunked, and it's going to be a lot less than that. We know Chelsea, we know Arsenal are pursuing him. There are links to Man United as well. What's the latest as far as you're aware around the transfer and exit of Moises Caicedo from Brighton?
Manchester United, I think the links have been exaggerated, and Liverpool won't enter the race with Caicedo as well. Liverpool fans hate me. I guess I could just stop there, full stop. Liverpool fans hate me, but Liverpool fans hate me specifically because I've said that they're not getting Caicedo for probably 3 windows now. And I suppose hindsight is always a wonderful thing, because you can now DM me your apologies for saying that he was going to sign for Liverpool in January, because he is, of course, still at Brighton. But no, in all seriousness, Caicedo will leave Brighton this window. And when he signed the new deal, Brighton knew that he wanted a fresh challenge, even if they qualified for European football. But unlike Alexis McAllister, where Liverpool got a bargain, this one will be done more on Brighton's terms. So the deal that Caicedo signs does allow him to facilitate a move. So there is a kind of clause, an agreement of sorts, but there's not a number, there's not a release clause. And that's really important, because nobody can just trigger something. And therefore, you got to negotiate with Brighton. And as you rightly say, I don't see this one being a 100 million transfer, but Brighton will clearly want a bidding war. It's going to take, even though Brighton will not just slap a specific price tag on, they'll try and get as much as they can. It's going to take a minimum of 70 million guaranteed, plus 10 million in add-ons. So a total package of 80 million will be the starting point of success. And then we wait and see how many clubs enter the race and what that ultimately does to the price. And I think that Arsenal's final bid for Caicedo did, to some extent, set a little bit of a yardstick, whereas what Chelsea bid originally was a little bit lower. And had they walked away at that point, and perhaps nobody had bid after Chelsea, then maybe there was the opportunity to go in a bit lower. And this is the frustration, by the way, because Brighton will push for one thing, but I can tell you categorically, those close to the Caicedo side point towards the Tchouaméni fee and say, how can Caicedo be more expensive than Tchouaméni? But we don't just value players on like for like. We value players on age, on profile, on potential, on time left on the contract, on whether or not the club wish to sell, all kinds of things. So valuation is very difficult, and it is about going to Brighton and agreeing with Brighton. It's not about pointing to another player. It's not about what the agent thinks. It's all about agreeing a deal with Brighton. And I do expect them to hold out for that minimum package of 80 million. So big priority for Chelsea, always has been, even if they'd have got Manuel Ugarte, who's now gone to PSG. Caicedo was still a very big priority for Chelsea. And I expect Arsenal to be in the mix as well. And that may well be the case, even if they succeed, as is increasingly expected with Declan Rice, who I'm sure we'll talk about later. So Moises Caicedo is likely to have the same kind of options as he did in January. And the only difference is that Brighton are more willing sellers this time around.
Yeah, the Caicedo deal was interesting. We had a comment there for one of our members saying, Man United sitting on the bench again for a deal like this. I suppose that echoes into what you said five to 10 minutes ago. If Man United don't feel like they can win the race for these two players based on where they want to go, teams are already ahead of them, you're better off putting your eggs into other baskets. But look, I think Caicedo is such a talented player. Can Arsenal afford both? Like, we'll come on to the Rice deal in a minute, but do you see Arsenal having the financial power to also get Caicedo, because I think a lot of their fans, there was a big article yesterday from Jacob Steinberg talking about the Rice agreement, which we'll move on to, but they're also looking at Caicedo and Gundogan. The way I read it, maybe I misread it with my dyslexic brain, but it's like they're going for all three. Can you see that being plausible?
Yes, I think is the short answer. I mean, Arsenal are going to have a healthy budget to spend, and budget is not as black and white as people think. I suppose when people hear Rice, and we know that Arsenal are going to be bidding in terms of the guaranteed fee under 100 million, and then the bonuses will still be determined. So the outlay for Rice is going to be somewhere pushing 100 million, and then we wait and see how gettable the add-ons are and when they're paid. And then people hear Caicedo at 80 million and they say that's 180 million, and then we want X, Y, and Z. So suddenly we're at 250 or 300 million, but it doesn't really work like that because you don't know the payment terms. So first of all, 100 odd million for Rice doesn't mean that it's 100 million up front. Second of all, on the books, if the contract was 5 years, you can amortize that over 5 years. So your annual outlay, strictly for accounting purposes, is smaller as well. And then you also don't know what the player commercially or in any other areas is going to bring the club that you can offset. So clubs like to see, especially for younger players, the transfer fee as an investment, not an expense. And the longer they stay at the football club and the better they do, the more the fee pays for itself. So there's all kinds of things here that play into what you can and can't spend. And this is ultimately how Chelsea have been able to drop around 600 million over the last two windows. So I would start by always only looking at the guaranteed fee in terms of spend. And then I would understand whether there's a big chunk up front or whether actually it's spread over 4 or 5 years. And then on top of that, it's always important to understand that under the rules for profit and sustainability and also UEFA's financial fair play, you're able to classify numbers differently. So Arsenal can divide a Rice fee by 5 on a 5-year contract. And then if they sell Nicola Pepe and bring in however much, I know it won't be anywhere near what they paid, but just using that as an example, as long as there's no amortization remaining, they can declare that annually as pure profit, which can therefore offset a lot of the annual costs. So Arsenal are going to be disciplined and only sign players where they think there's financial value, and they definitely feel like Rice is somebody that can add value to the football club. And we know that they were pushing hard for Caicedo in January. That interest doesn't just go away. So I genuinely don't think that we can discount Rice and Caicedo. But as I say many times, until you've got a player, you have to have a consistent narrative with all of your top targets. So you can never say to Caicedo at this point, by the way, if we get Rice, we probably won't come in for you. You have to make players feel wanted, and you have to progress transfers to allow anybody, because you don't know how the market's going to move. You don't know how the seller is going to react. You don't know whether your deal is going to get hijacked. So you have to make a variety of targets feel like you might go for them, which is just how the window works. And if Arsenal said to Caicedo, I'm not saying this is the case, by the way, because I think both are possible, but if Arsenal said to Caicedo, you're only our number one target if we don't get Rice, and if we get Rice, we're going to have to add up the maths, then Moises Caicedo will say, cool, Chelsea are telling me I'm the number one target and they can move now. I'm not interested in Arsenal because Arsenal don't want me. So it's about how you handle that aspect. And it's a real art because you have to make a player feel wanted, but you also have to be honest and consistent. Otherwise, they just feel messed around. And this is why recruitment experts get paid the big bucks, because they know how to talk to players and how to have an honest and consistent narrative. And I would say that Arsenal and Liverpool at doing that are two of the best in the business.
Totally understand that. Ilkay Gundogan. There was talks that in the next few days, his future is going to become clear. What is the latest in terms of your understanding? Will he stay at City? Will it be Barca? Could Arsenal pull this off? Or maybe that Saudi deal? There's kind of 4 options as we read it across the media. How do you see the situation with Gundogan going?
Manchester City want to keep Gundogan for sure. So that's the first thing to say. And a lot is now going to depend on the player and feeding back to the club. But he's had a phenomenal end to the season. And obviously Manchester City have got the treble. So everything is looking very rosy as far as both City and Gundogan are concerned. But he's 32 years of age. And we know that he in the past has had his interest piqued by Barcelona, and with Arsenal, the interest is very serious, I would say. And Mikel Arteta would take the player in a heartbeat. There's absolutely no denying that. And it'd be really interesting, and it would be a compliment to Arsenal to see whether Manchester City adopt the same kind of approach in dealing with Arsenal this summer. Obviously, Gundogan is a little bit of an anomaly due to his situation, but if we factor in other Arsenal interests at Manchester City, like João Cancelo, for example, that Pep Guardiola would ideally like to offload, and it doesn't look like he's guaranteed anything back at Bayern at this point either. Do Manchester City feel like Arsenal are closer now and will again be a Premier League rival? And does that change their approach in terms of wanting any of their players to go to Arsenal? Or is it same old? And do Manchester City just feel like they can dominate? And much like when they sold players to Arsenal over the course of the last summer, they're absolutely fine with doing business. So we know that with Gundogan, it's a slightly different situation because of age and contracts. But the way that it's going to work is the player's going to take his time, and everything is on his terms. So nothing is decided at this point. Manchester City would love the player to stay. It's as simple as that. And now the season's over and the celebrations are over and the hangovers are over. The expectation is that Gundogan is going to, first of all, a bit like Bobby Firmino did with Liverpool, give Manchester City his answer. And then, if he is to become a free agent, suddenly there's a free for all. And this is where Barcelona may be able to move because they feel like they would get value in that deal. I wouldn't rule out PSG. I still think that Arsenal's interest is genuine as well. So there'll be a big race, but the first thing that has to be established is the Manchester City aspect, because the German international has been offered a contract extension by Manchester City. So this isn't a case of who is he joining. There is still that scenario on the table of maybe he'll extend at Manchester City. And at the moment, Manchester City haven't received their answer. So the next step will not be where's he going. The next step will be what is his answer to Manchester City. And then we can have the conversation about where he might go if it's a negative answer to Manchester City.
That makes perfect sense. Of course, the first bit of big breaking news last night, which we haven't really delved into in detail yet, was Declan Rice. Graham Bailey's reported this morning that Arsenal have made a major breakthrough in their pursuit of Rice after agreeing to pay West Ham more than 100 million for the England midfielder. Jacob Steinberg, very, very similar headlines from him as well. What's your understanding of the latest when it comes to Declan Rice? Is it as close as many media reports have suggested? And is this fee going to go above £100 million?
Yeah, two good questions. I think that Arsenal always intended to move very quickly after West Ham's win in the Europa Conference League final. West Ham will sell Rice. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And we know now David Sullivan has confirmed that line of reporting that myself and others have been saying for quite some time. And I don't think this is a race between clubs. I think this is a race between Arsenal and West Ham to get the deal done. I think there's low confidence on the Bayern side, even though they continue to discuss internally. They haven't placed any kind of offer at this point. I think Chelsea have moved on to other targets as well. And obviously the less suitors that make any kind of number to West Ham, the more Arsenal can stick to their guns. So this is a deal really that is going to come down to bonuses and add-ons, but I expect Rice to join Arsenal barring any unexpected hitches. I don't think another suitor at this stage can really influence the situation. I think it's just all about Arsenal. So are we going to get a scenario where West Ham are so greedy, if you like, although that's not really a fair word to West Ham, that's a bad choice of word. West Ham are so ambitious with the financials that they're asking for that eventually Arsenal say, we're disciplined in our approach and we're not prepared to go that high. But the signs are not pointing to that at this stage. The signs are pointing to two things. One, as I've reported many times, Arsenal want Rice in terms of guaranteed fee for under 100 million. And Arsenal's formal offer, when it hits and imminently, will be, in terms of that guaranteed fee, under 100 million. And then it just depends what the add-ons are and how gettable they are. And it wouldn't surprise me if there's a halfway house whereby some of the add-ons are very gettable and create the healthy number that West Ham are looking for. And maybe there's a bit extra there that are less gettable, like Arsenal winning the Premier League or Arsenal winning the Champions League. And then that's what takes it sky high and well over the British record. West Ham want two things: obviously as much money as possible, but also a healthy chunk up front. So it reminds me of when Chelsea signed Wesley Fofana and everyone said it will be a world record. And then actually it wasn't quite a world record, but Leicester got a lot of money up front because West Ham, especially with European football now, are looking to strengthen and move quickly in the market. So it's actually in West Ham's interest, Rice's interests and Arsenal's interest to get this one done as quick as possible, and to do so, first of all, to settle the player, and second of all, to avoid any surprises. But Rice wants Arsenal. And as I've said many times on this show, he wants to stay in London. It's not a deal breaker, but it's a nice added bonus. He's spoken glowingly about the club. He's spoken glowingly about Mikel Arteta. So it's almost not about Rice anymore now. It's just about Arsenal moving fast. And if they agree a number with West Ham United, then they're going to get this one done very quickly.
It does feel like they're moving quick. And I saw a few gooners in the last 3 or 4 days moaning that it isn't done as of yet, which I thought was a little premature. I understand there's a little bit of PTSD because of Mykhailo Mudryk as an example. Maybe even an element of the way they chased Caicedo and ended up not getting him. That fear of somebody else sort of jumping into their slipstream and coming up from sort of behind and taking the deal off their hands. But it doesn't feel like there's anybody else even in this race. The Rice race right now. I've not seen a credible story of anybody else like making a genuine move. There's like United want to be kept informed and Chelsea have an interest still, but nothing concrete from anybody.
Not necessarily, but it's early stages, and it's kind of normal to see how the market moves and whether or not Arsenal wrap something up very quickly, because like we discussed before, there's no point entering a race that you can't win. So if, for example, and I'm just using this as an example, so don't quote this because I'm going low on purpose. If Arsenal bid 65 million plus 10 million in add-ons for Rice, then someone else might say, hang on a minute, they're starting very low. West Ham are going to reject that. The player wants Champions League football. Arsenal are not going to go any higher. We're going to come in now. But if Arsenal bid 90 plus 10, 90 plus 20, something like that, then first of all, it will price other suitors out of the market. And second of all, it will get done very quickly. And you would be surprised how much other clubs know about the movement of their rivals, because that is just due diligence. So when a club doesn't enter the race, even if they want the player, it's usually an indication that they're aware from doing their own due diligence that things are heading in another direction. And again, Liverpool and Arsenal are experts at that. When they don't think they can get a player, they tend to walk away and not waste their time.
Yeah, which makes perfect sense. There are a lot of people as well, a lot in their comments today saying that Rice, is he good enough? Is he worth that amount of money? What is your personal view on that? Do you think he is a £100 million quality player, Ben?
Well, the market is just redefining what a £100 million player is. So you can argue this in many different ways. So we love to focus on valuation, but valuation has always gone up in the market. So 3 years ago, Rice might have been 65 million. 10 years ago, he'd have been 45 million. 20 years ago, he'd have been 12 million. I remember when my club, Emil Heskey, Leicester had Emil Heskey, and we sold him to Liverpool. And I think off the top of my head, apologies if I get this wrong, it was about 11, 12 million. And everyone was like, wow. And now if you said you were signing a striker for 10, 11 million, people would use the phrase cheap or bargain. So this tells you that every single window prices go up and up and up, and that inflation is a little bit misleading. Is Rice one of the top players in the Premier League in his position? 100%. Is there a high ceiling for Rice to improve? 100%. Is he going to be better at a top club? 100%. And has he got aspects of his game that he can improve? 100%. And when you look at Rice at West Ham, what has he offered? Leadership, tenacity, aggression, set pieces, some goal scoring and assists, a positive passer, a direct passer, and a brilliant reader of the game off the ball. Then when you look at Rice with England, he can play in a one-man deep lying midfield role, or he can play in a two in deep lying midfield and allow somebody to kind of pivot off those two into a more attack-minded position. So he's pretty versatile. He's extremely intelligent. He's a really good character. He's an exceptional leader. He speaks well on the field in terms of instructing his teammates and also off it as well. So there's nothing not to like. The age, the profile, the discipline, the selflessness, the quality of delivery, the quickness of delivery. Put him in a great club and he'll be absolutely magnificent. So I would say that he's either worth 100 million, or if he's worth 75, 80 million right now, and you can argue the market whatever way you like, he'll grow into that price tag at Arsenal or wherever else he goes.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that football fans lose sight of the inflation in the game. Football inflation grows. Listen, inflation in the UK in the last 12 months has been crippling for people. But since 2000, when you signed Heskey, the money in football has grown. Depends on what publication you read, but anywhere between 450 and 550%. So that would have made Rice back in 2000 a 15, 16 million pound player, which for the level of his, that, you know, the main leading, one of the main leading England midfielders in that time would have probably sold for like Gerrard or Scholes in 2000. Well, Scholes, Gerrard a little bit young, would have gone for more than 15 million pounds. So I'm not saying he's as good as Paul Scholes, but just trying to point that out. People always lose sight of the fact Rooney, was 27 million, but Rooney in today's market would have been almost a 200 million pound signing. That's the. Sometimes I don't think people fathom that there's the more money you pump into football, the more players are going to cost. But it's just because there's more money available. It's one of those things. But yeah, I think Rice will be a tremendous signing for them. We have a super chat for you here, actually, Ben. This is Ben. What's your early top 4 predictions for next season?
Oh, yikes! Well, the top 1 is Leicester, because the question was about the Championship top 4, right? I think Manchester City 1, for sure. I just don't see anybody toppling them, even though Arsenal had a magnificent season. Then I think 2 will be Liverpool again, which might be a slightly contentious prediction, given where they were last season. But I really expect Liverpool to have a strong summer and to respond very positively. Then I think that 3 will be Manchester United, who I expect to continue strong under Erik ten Hag. And then 4, I'm going to get absolutely hammered for this. No comment. No, I think 4 is a toss-up between Chelsea and Arsenal. And I really don't want to be disrespectful to Arsenal because of the season that they've had. And I actually think the whole top 4, but particularly 2 to 4, will only have a matter of points separating them. So logically, you'd say Arsenal, especially if they get Declan Rice. But I've just got a sneaky suspicion that Chelsea are going to have a really, really improved season. So I wouldn't want to hedge my bets between Chelsea or Arsenal. If you were forcing me to put down money on it, I think I would have to say Arsenal 4 and Chelsea 5. But I do just have a sneaky suspicion that Chelsea are going to recover quite dramatically next season. So I know that's kind of sitting on the fence a little bit with my number 4. And I know that's bumping Liverpool quite high. I think everyone is in agreement that Manchester City are the title favourites, but that's my prediction. And I refuse to be categorically drawn on the 4th.
I get you. And listen, my predictions are going to change. By the end of the window, everyone's predictions are going to look different anyway, because we'll know who everybody signed. We'll have seen people in pre-season. There'll even be a few games in the Premier League play by then, because I don't think people have deep. It's a very quick turnaround until pre-season starts. You've got the international games this week. And then in about under 3 weeks' time, clubs are back for pre-season. Man United's first pre-season games on the 13th of July. So you always train for at least a week before your first pre-season game. I'm not too sure when Arsenal's and Chelsea's are, but yeah, it's going to be a very interesting summer indeed.
What I would say is bookmark that, and we'll come back to it on the first game of the season. And that's not me fobbing it off. It's that if you're going to make an informed prediction, fine, we can speak about now, but we're basically predicting based off last season. So if we're predicting based off last season, my top 4 prediction would be how the table finished at the end of the season. So you'd have to put Newcastle in there as well. And what a job Eddie Howe's done. But I think the point with all of this is more around how can we judge any team before we see what they do in the window and before we see how they line up on the first game of the season. Because if Manchester United have got new owners, the mood is positive, they have an amazing summer somehow. If Arsenal get Rice and Caicedo, if Liverpool do the revamp that we think they're going to do, and they've always got Alexis McAllister, if Chelsea spend another 300 million, it's all going to influence your predictions. So those are my predictions now, but I reserve the right to change them in the first week of August.
Laka here says Arsenal underdog tag continues. We love it. Great show, Ben Jacobs, and the ever consistent Terry Flowers. But thank you very much. For,
what did he call you?
Flowers. My whole life, Terry Flowers. It's always been the same.
T. Flowers, like the Blackburn goalkeeper.
Yeah, Mr. He was a good keeper, Tim Flowers. He was a good keeper. This here from Tad says, no smoke without fire. Al Watan, 50% owned by Jessim's father, wouldn't report that had he won the bid. British media and Sir Jim on damage control is what.
Can I just respond to this? Because I've seen a few things in the chat as well about British media being against Sheikh Jassim. And as ever, I'll always respond if people want to engage respectfully. From my perspective, I've been very open, and not everyone will be familiar with this. I worked and lived in Qatar for 5 years. I'm very familiar with the group and also how business gets done there. And with Sir Jim Ratcliffe, we know that he's had a long-standing interest in Manchester United, even though he tried to buy Chelsea as well. And as a reporter, you're not picking sides. You're simply trying to be accurate. And jumping the gun is irresponsible journalism. And as I said at the beginning of the show, if you missed it, those close to the group in Qatar and those on the selling side are adamant that a holding pattern is taking place. And neither group, as of last night, were informed that they'd won the race. And again, the Al Watan story, if they wholeheartedly backed it because of the relationship between their paper and Sheikh Jassim's father, who's known as HBJ, they'd have run a back page exclusive. But they were running a story that was entitled Press Reports. So for those sort of wanting black and white and celebrating a Qatar win, you can do that. And you've got a 33% chance of being right because it's highly likely to be one of the two groups or a minority investor. No sale is, of course, a possibility as well. And if you're right, then celebrate it in a day, a week, a month, whenever it is official. But as a journalist, me anyway, I'm not pouring cold water on anyone's feelings or stories or Twitter statuses. What I'm saying to you is I personally will not be saying there is any winner to the Manchester United race until I am 1,000% sure, because it's that big. It's a massive moment for the football club. So this isn't about being dismissive of Qatar. This is about saying neither group has been informed yet. If Sheikh Jassim wins, and sorry, Terry, if Sheikh Jassim wins, then that's not something that in any way, shape or form, and the same for Ratcliffe, I'm going to be attacking. I'm going to be saying who they are. I'm going to be putting scrutiny on that. And I'm also going to be saying what they're going to do. And there's loads of positives. It's debt-free. It's cash-free. It's 100% of the club. They're ambitious. They want the club to be not just a successful football club, but a growing brand. They're going to carry out a 100-day review as part of their transition. They're going to be bringing in football experts. They're going to be trying to effectively compete with what the likes of Manchester City have done. Their model will be slightly different to the City Football Group, but it's about modernising the football club. It's about bringing back the glory days, and they know they have to spend to do that, which is why they're so adamant about this pledged investment. So there's lots to like, and there's lots to scrutinise. So this isn't about saying they haven't won. Quite the opposite. They're in the race. And I was one of the first people to report they're firmly in the race. But it's so big for Manchester United that just to aggregate and jump the gun and say they've won before they've even been told they've won, for me, would be very irresponsible as a journalist.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I had it last night because I referred to the bid. I can't quite remember exactly the words I used, but I think I did a post, and I just did a post that kind of confirmed what had been the press release piece. And someone here said, notice how they. So I said Qatari outlet Wharton, an organization that Sheikh the father reports that the Qataris have been successful in their bid. Now, when I do those, what people have said, I just verbatim write what they've said. That way, I can never be claimed of misquoting them, right? So if it's something they've tweeted. Guy says, notice how they always use the Qataris and not just him by United, got their agendas set and ready. And it's like, bro, I want him. I've got zero agendas. I'm ready to oil myself up. Like, I'm ready to go. But there is, again, people have got, it isn't, of course, there are some journalists that are, and I'm not going to, I'll call it out bluntly. I called it out on Saturday. I saw a journalist in Saturday morning write about how bad Qatar buying Man United would be because of human rights, etc., etc. But then in the afternoon released an article praising Sheikh Mansour, the brilliance of City and what they've developed, and how amazing it is that they're on the edge of a treble. And I sat there and thought to myself, oh, the irony. So I can get it from that point of view, but Ben certainly hasn't done that. And just in terms of an update, PA have reported. Here, I just want to write what they've said about this. It echoes exactly what Ben has said. Different words, but same sentiment. It says here that Sheikh Jassim's camp described these recent reports as pure speculation and say they remain in a holding pattern, which is what Ben has said. They expect the next steps will be for United's boards to meet and consider both bids. It says the Qataris are eager. Again, this is directly from his camp. The Qataris are eager to get the deal done with the summer transfer window about to kick into gear. So another media outlet 12 minutes ago confirming exactly what Ben has said. A couple of extra super chats here. One says, Ben, who do you think United will sign first?
Well, if they can get Mason Mount, he'll be one of the first through the door. That's for sure, but it will all just depend on price. I think that Kim is one to watch. I know that there's not really been a breakthrough at this point, which might suggest that the release clause is being used as a yardstick rather than necessarily being triggered. Remember, with a release clause, the payment terms are very specific. So you might use the number in the release clause and try and get a different deal. So we have to wait and see on that one. But when there's a release clause only active for 15 days, I think it's logical that the player's future, if he chooses to leave, could be resolved within 2 weeks or so. So I think that Manchester United will be looking to do something quick. And those are two of the players that might be doable before the players return to pre-season. But with Mount, the complication again is just on fee. If it turns out that Chelsea are more flexible and come down, it could move very quickly. If Chelsea stick to their valuation, it could drag on throughout a large part of the summer. So we're going to have to wait and see on that one. And I also think that from Manchester United's point of view, they want to give Erik ten Hag something early to make sure that the tone is set, because with the ownership uncertainty, and when you consider his first window, which was overshadowed by Cristiano Ronaldo and the saga over his eventual exit and subsequently joining Al Nassr, Erik ten Hag has not really had a stable summer window. So window number one, Ronaldo overshadowed, brand new at the football club, all kinds of stories out there, all kinds of reports that somehow people didn't like his methods. Disastrous start to the season, and incredible that he was able to turn it around, win a trophy and qualify for the Champions League. You have to applaud that. It's absolutely sensational. Now he's settled, and his last summer window had Frankie de Jong and question marks over whether the Glazers would spend. This summer's about who's his ultimate boss. And also, again, because of financial fair play, what can they spend? And really, the only way of settling things is get a bit of business done early so everyone can get excited about football, not worried about owners, not worried about financial fair play, not worried about budgets, not worried about missing out on targets. And I think that's going to be really important to have somebody fresh early for day one of pre-season, because even for the squad, like I look at my team, Leicester, and Brendan Rodgers said this, and Leicester ended up going down last summer at the end of the window. Brendan Rodgers went, we just couldn't bring in anybody new. And it wasn't just about the quality of what those new people can bring. It's about freshening things up. It's about new faces. It's about getting excited about a new member of the squad, a new dynamic in the dressing room. It can get stale otherwise. And I think that it'll be the same for Erik ten Hag. There's only one thing Ten Hag can control, the football side. He can't control the ownership. He can't control the budget. He can't control the media, but he can control one thing, his dressing room. And if he can bring in a positive and exciting name into his dressing room, then the tone is changed. And I think that Liverpool are not happy with their season. But what have they been able to do? Announce Alexis McAllister within days of the season ending. And now if you look at the Liverpool fan base, of course, they're fuming that they've not got Champions League football, but everybody's suddenly saying, what a signing McAllister is. So it's very clever because it rejuvenates people and it changes the conversation to next season rather than letting this season linger.
Yeah, totally get that. We've got a few more super chats before the end of the show here. One says, Ben, do you think Chelsea will go hard this summer?
Hard on outgoings, that's for sure. I think the incomings will be a little bit more conservative. They're not in the race as things stand for Kylian Mbappe, even though we're going to hear them spoken about consistently. My understanding is that they're not going to be seriously exploring that deal. Chelsea need a goal scorer. They need at least one midfielder, probably two, because N'Golo Kante is about to sign for Al Ittihad. And they need a goalkeeper, potentially a number one goalkeeper. And who's to say they won't need two, because both Kepa and Edouard Mendy could end up leaving. So Chelsea will bring in 3 or 4, I would imagine, but I doubt it's going to be a 350 million spend again. And Caicedo could obviously therefore be the highest value player that they bring in, but we wait and see what's possible as far as a traditional goal scorer is concerned. Christopher Nkunku is obviously going to be arriving and will be officially confirmed within the next kind of 7 days or so. And Malo Gusto was already signed in January, but loaned back to Lyon. So he'll join up with the squad as well. But it's outgoings that are important for Chelsea. And it's not as easy as you might think. I think somehow people hear the word outgoings at every club and they think, cool, when's he going? But Chelsea have got players that will only move to certain clubs. Chelsea have got players that are on sky-high wages. So not every suitor is going to be able to necessarily enter the race for an outgoing that Chelsea want. And I think that's really important to stress, because the outgoings that Chelsea need to do are 3 windows worth of work, and in terms of the volume. And they're trying to do it all in one window. So Pulisic to Serie A is a possibility. Hakim Ziyech's got high wages, but is a player that Chelsea would like to sell. And there's a few others as well that have been widely reported, like Chalobah, Loftus-Cheek, Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, Kai Havertz. But again, Chelsea are asking for quite high money there. So I don't see Real Madrid paying that. So it's not as easy as you might think. But the hard aspect, if we're to use that word, as far as Chelsea are concerned, will specifically be on outgoings rather than a mass spending spree on incomings.
Totally get that. This here says, I think Newcastle money and United money and City money kicks in. Arsenal, Chelsea and Liverpool and others will be forgotten. I don't think they'll be forgotten. You saw how much Chelsea have already spent. It's not about how much you spend. It's about how well you spend it, Jacob. But thank you for the super chat, bro. And this is Terry. Am I seeing a guy to deal off? You are. I had the wrong overlay on the whole show. It's your wrong overlay. So that's why. That's from last week. So my apologies. But yeah, thank you for the super chat and the donation, Kofi. I really appreciate that. Ben, always a pleasure to speak to you, my friend. I'm sure we'll catch up again next week. Viewers, make sure you hit the like button before you leave. 3:30 today, I'm back with Lee Gunner to delve into some more of the transfers, get his take on the treble, and some more of these outrageous takes I've seen on his TikTok in the last few days. So we're going to be going through all of that at 3:30 today. So make sure you're all back here then ready when we go live. Ben, until next time, you take care of yourself, mate. God bless, and we'll see everybody again